In a small town nestled deep in rural Ohio, two worlds were about to collide. One man, bound by tradition, duty, and the rigid beliefs of his Amish upbringing. The other, a curious outsider, seeking something deeper than ordinary. What started as a forbidden friendship would soon become a love that defied everything: family, faith, and the expectations of a lifetime. But when love is tested by fear, sacrifice, and the pull of the past you can't escape, what will you risk to fight for the future you've always dreamed of? The first encounter, a secret friendship. John had always been drawn to the simplicity and discipline of the Amish way of life. Growing up in rural Ohio, he would often find himself watching the Amish families as they went about their daily routines. He admired their connection to the land, their quiet dedication to work, and the peacefulness that seemed to radiate from their communities. It was a world that felt both foreign and oddly comforting to him, though he never questioned the fast-paced, technology-driven world he lived in. He couldn't help but wonder about the lives of those who chose a different path. One warm summer day, while walking along a trail in the woods near his house, John noticed a figure in the distance. It was a young Amish man, no older than him, walking quietly through the trees. The man's clothes were simple: a wide-brimmed hat, a long-sleeved shirt, and dark trousers that blended into the surroundings. There was something peaceful about the way he moved, like he was one with nature, a person who had nothing to prove and everything to be at peace with. John couldn't help but feel intrigued. This was the first time he'd ever seen an Amish person outside the boundaries of the community, and it sparked a curiosity he couldn't shake. He decided, almost on impulse, to approach him. "Hey!" John said hesitantly, breaking the silence that hung in the air. The Amish man turned to face him, his dark eyes wide with surprise but not fear. "I didn't mean to startle you," John added, feeling awkward. "I just saw you walking and I guess I'm just curious." The young man's lips curled into a small, cautious smile. "It's all right. My name's Sam." "John," he replied, stepping a little closer, but still keeping a respectful distance. They stood there for a moment, sizing each other up. John wasn't sure what to say next. After all, they were from entirely different worlds. But the curiosity that had led him to approach Samuel only grew stronger the longer they stood in silence. "You're Amish, right?" John asked, unsure if it was an inappropriate question. Samuel nodded. "Yes, I'm part of the community, not far from here. We keep to ourselves mostly." John nodded, understanding. His knowledge of the Amish was limited, just what he had read in books and seen on television. But it was enough to know that their lives were structured around faith and tradition. "I've always wondered about your way of life," John admitted. "It's so different from what I know. It's peaceful here, though. Quiet. You have something I don't, or at least I've never known it." Samuel looked at him, his expression softening. "We don't have much of the things you probably do, but it's enough." They talked for a while longer, and as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, John realized how easy it had been to converse with Samuel. Despite their differences, there was a common understanding that bridged the gap between their lives. Samuel wasn't judging John for the technology and fast pace of his world, and John didn't feel like an outsider in Samuel's calm, traditional life. That evening, before they parted ways, Samuel said quietly, "I have to go now, but if you ever want to meet again, you can find me here, in the woods. It's a good place to talk." John felt a sense of excitement and something else, a connection he couldn't quite explain. "I'd like that," he said, watching Samuel disappear into the trees, already feeling the pull of their unlikely friendship. Chapter 2, A Secret Friendship. From that day forward, John and Samuel met regularly in the woods. At first, their encounters were short, tentative exchanges, conversations about their lives, their families, and the worlds they inhabited. John learned more about the Amish way of life, its values, and the strong sense of community that Samuel had grown up with. Samuel, in turn, listened intently as John spoke about his experiences in the modern world, about the technology he worked with and the busyness that characterized his life. Their meetings were always in secret. The Amish community, with its strict rules and customs, would never approve of their friendship, let alone a relationship between someone from the outside world and one of their own. Samuel had been taught to stay away from outsiders, to keep his life enclosed within the boundaries of the community. But as they met in the woods, it became increasingly clear that something deeper was developing between them. Their friendship grew stronger with each passing week, and they shared more intimate details of their lives. Samuel spoke of the constraints of his upbringing, the pressure to marry within the community, and the quiet yearning he felt for something beyond the fields and barns that surrounded him. John, in turn, shared his frustrations with the fast-paced world he lived in, a world that seemed to value achievement over human connection, convenience over meaning. They discovered that they had more in common than they had originally thought. Both of them felt a sense of longing, Samuel for the outside world, and John for a sense of peace and belonging that he hadn't found in the technology-driven life he led. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of color behind them, Samuel and John sat side by side, their shoulders almost touching. The quiet of the woods felt like a secret sanctuary, a place where the outside world couldn't reach them. Samuel turned to John, his eyes reflecting a mix of uncertainty and something deeper, something that John felt too. "I've never had a friend like you," Samuel said softly. His voice held a tenderness that struck John to his core. John smiled, feeling his heart race in a way he hadn't expected. "I haven't either, but I'm glad we found each other." The words hung in the air for a moment before they both turned their gaze back to the horizon, where the last traces of sunlight disappeared behind the trees. In that quiet, shared moment, John and Samuel knew that whatever came next, their friendship, the secret bond they had formed, was something worth holding on to. First kiss, first conflict, a new beginning. The days that followed were filled with a growing sense of excitement and nervousness for John and Samuel. Their friendship, built on shared curiosity and mutual respect, had deepened into something more, something neither of them fully understood at first. As they met more frequently, their conversations became more intimate, and the lines between friendship and something deeper began to blur. One cold evening, everything changed. They had gathered in their usual spot in the woods, the fading light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air felt charged, filled with an unspoken tension that neither of them had acknowledged until that moment. John glanced over at Samuel, his heart beating faster for reasons he couldn't explain. Samuel, looking as calm and composed as ever, met his gaze, his dark eyes holding something new, something that made John's breath catch in his throat. Without a word, they both seemed to realize that this was a moment, the one where everything between them would shift forever. Slowly, cautiously, John leaned in. He could hear his heart thundering in his chest, every instinct telling him to stop, to pull away. But something in Samuel's eyes told him it was the right thing to do. And before either of them could second-guess it, their lips met. It was gentle at first, a tentative exploration of what was new and unfamiliar. But soon the kiss deepened, their connection intensified with each passing second. Time seemed to stand still as they held each other in the quiet embrace of the woods. The world outside, with its rules and expectations, faded away, leaving only the two of them and the soft sounds of nature surrounding them. But as quickly as it had started, the kiss ended. They pulled away, both of them breathless and a little unsure of what to say next. John's mind raced with thoughts, trying to process what had just happened. Samuel, too, looked conflicted, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. I shouldn't have done that," Samuel whispered, stepping back, his voice shaky. His words hit John like a cold wave, leaving him standing there, stunned. "Why?" John asked, confused. "What's wrong?" "I can't," Samuel began, his voice trailing off. "I can't do this. It's not just about me. My family, my community, they would never accept this. What we've shared, what we just did, it goes against everything I've been taught." John could feel the heaviness of Samuel's words settle between them. The reality of their worlds crashing into each other was undeniable. Samuel had spent his whole life within the strict confines of Amish tradition, and even though they had formed a connection so real, so powerful, it wasn't enough to erase the years of conditioning that had shaped him. Before John could respond, the sound of footsteps reached their ears, followed by the unmistakable voice of someone calling out, "Samuel!" Both of them froze. Samuel's face went pale, and his eyes widened in panic. "My father," Samuel muttered under his breath. "He's coming." John looked around, trying to think of a way to escape, but it was too late. The figure of Samuel's father appeared through the trees, his expression stern and unyielding. He stopped when he saw the two of them standing together, a tension building in the air. "Samuel," his father said coldly, "what are you doing here?" And with him, his gaze flicked to John, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Samuel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was paralyzed by the sudden confrontation, by the weight of his father's gaze. I wasn't doing anything wrong," Samuel finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're a disgrace," his father spat, his tone sharp and filled with anger. "I told you to stay away from those outside the community. Now look at you. You betrayed everything we've taught you." John could see the pain in Samuel's eyes, the hurt that he couldn't hide. His heart ached for him. He wanted to step in, to say something to make it better, but he knew it wasn't his place. This was bigger than just the two of them. "I won't let this go, Samuel," his father continued, his voice trembling with rage. "You're no longer welcome here. You've chosen this outsider over your family, over your faith. You're no longer part of this community." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. His father turned and walked away, leaving Samuel standing in the woods, stunned and broken. John reached out to him, but Samuel stepped back, as though afraid to be touched. "I have to go," Samuel said quietly, his voice strained with emotion. "I can't stay here anymore. Not now. Not like this." John watched as Samuel turned and walked away, the distance between them growing with each step. A sense of helplessness settled over him. He had no idea what to do, how to help. Everything had changed in an instant, and now Samuel was facing a future he hadn't been prepared for, a new beginning. The following days were a blur for John. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the woods, about the way Samuel had looked when his father had cast him out. It broke his heart to think that Samuel was now completely alone, with no home, no family, and no support. John's mind raced with thoughts of how he could help. He couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Samuel had given him so much, opened his eyes to a different way of seeing the world, and now it was John's turn to offer something in return. On the third day after Samuel's expulsion from the Amish community, John couldn't wait any longer. He knew what he had to do, with his heart pounding in his chest. He went to his parents and explained everything. He told them about Samuel, his background, the friendship they had formed, and what had happened with his father. John's parents listened quietly, their faces unreadable. When he finished, there was a long pause. "We can help him," his mother said softly, breaking the silence. "If Samuel is willing, we can take him in. He won't have to face the world alone." John's heart lifted at her words. This was what Samuel needed. A place to stay, a chance to heal. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That evening, John found Samuel sitting by a creek not far from his house. His face was tired, drawn with the weight of the past few days. But there was a flicker of hope in his eyes when he saw John approach. "Samuel, I talked to my parents," John began, taking a deep breath. "You don't have to be alone. If you're willing, you can stay with us. We'll help you. You can learn about the modern world, about everything you miss." Samuel looked at him, his expression one of disbelief. For a moment, it seemed as though he couldn't fathom the offer. "Are you sure?" Samuel asked quietly. "Your family, they would do this for me?" John nodded firmly. "Yes, they want to help. You don't have to go through this alone." Tears welled up in Samuel's eyes as he took a tentative step forward. "Thank you. I don't know what else to say." "You don't have to say anything," John replied, offering a reassuring smile. "You're not alone anymore." Together, they walked back to John's house, a new chapter beginning in both of their lives. Samuel was no longer part of the community that had rejected him, but he was not alone. With John and his family, he had a chance to build a new life, one filled with possibilities he had never imagined. The struggles of change, separation, and longing, the days that followed Samuel's move into John's home, were a mixture of hope and hardship. On one hand, Samuel was free from the constraints of his Amish upbringing. no longer bound by the rigid rules and customs that had dictated his life for so long. But on the other hand, the world outside his community was overwhelming. Every new experience felt like a mountain to climb. John did everything he could to ease Samuel's transition, guiding him through the maze of modern life. The first time Samuel saw a car up close, he had stared at it with wide eyes, as though it were a creature from another world. John had laughed, explaining the way they worked, showing him how to buckle a seatbelt and where to find the gas. The simple tasks, the everyday things Samuel had never been taught, felt like monumental challenges, and he struggled to keep up. "It's so fast," Samuel said one evening after their first drive together. "I can't believe people just rush around like that." John smiled at him, his heart aching with the knowledge that Samuel was stepping into a world that, for all its conveniences, felt cold and disconnected. "You'll get used to it," he reassured him. "It just takes time." But time seemed to stretch endlessly for Samuel. He missed the quiet of the Amish countryside, the familiar rhythms of his old life, even the closeness of the community. Although he was grateful to be free, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss, like a piece of himself was missing. The world John had brought him into was full of noise, of distractions, of people who seemed to rush through life without noticing the things that truly mattered. At night, when the house was quiet and everyone else had gone to sleep, Samuel would sometimes find himself staring out the window, lost in thought. The stars overhead reminded him of his home, and for a fleeting moment, he could almost hear the soft hum of Amish life, the low murmur of voices, the rhythm of the farm, the simple joy of belonging. Here, he didn't feel like he belonged. Not yet, at least. John noticed a sadness in Samuel's eyes, but didn't know how to fix it. He couldn't make the transition easier for him. The modern world was vast, and Samuel was only just beginning to scratch the surface of it. But John was there for him, every step of the way, helping him navigate through confusion, offering comfort when it all became too much. One afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, John turned to Samuel with a serious expression. "You know, there's no rush. You don't have to figure everything out right away. You can take your time." Samuel nodded slowly, appreciating John's patience. "I don't know if I'll ever feel like I fit in here." "You don't have to fit in," John said gently. "You just have to be yourself." Samuel smiled weakly, still unsure if he could ever truly embrace the world John was offering him. But despite the challenges, despite the overwhelming nature of it all, there were moments when Samuel started to see the beauty in the world around him. One evening, after a long day of errands, John took Samuel to the park. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. They sat together on a bench, and for the first time in a while, Samuel felt a sense of peace. "I never thought I'd see a sunset like this," Samuel said, his voice filled with awe. John smiled. "It's beautiful, right?" Samuel nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of gratitude. Maybe this wasn't bad after, but just as Samuel was starting to feel like he was finding his place, a new challenge arose. John had received an acceptance letter to college, something he had worked hard for, and now it was time for him to go. The news came with mixed feelings. John was excited about the opportunity, but the idea of being away from Samuel, of leaving him to navigate this new world alone, filled him with a sense of dread. "I don't know if I can do this without you," Samuel admitted one night, his voice quiet but heavy with emotion. John paused, looking at him, tore between the excitement of his new journey and the fear of leaving Samuel behind. "You can do it. You've made it this far, haven't you?" Samuel nodded, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "But what if I don't belong here? What if I can't make it on my own?" "You don't have to do it alone," John said, reaching out to take his hand. "I'll be back. I'm not going anywhere. But you're strong, Samuel. You've already proven that." Samuel tried to smile, but the thought of the separation weighed heavily on him. John's departure was inevitable, and as much as he wanted to support him, a part of him felt like he was losing the one person who had truly understood him. It was a painful realization. They were two people from different worlds, trying to build a life together in a world that didn't quite know what to do with him. A bold decision. The day John left for college came too quickly, and as he packed up his belongings, the reality of the situation began to set in. Samuel stood in the doorway, watching John move around the room, his hands methodically folding clothes and organizing his things. It felt surreal, as though the world had shifted beneath his feet. "I'll be back soon," John said, looking up at him with a reassuring smile. "It's only a few weeks, and you'll be fine, I promise." Samuel nodded, but his heart felt heavy. He wanted to believe John, wanted to trust that everything would work out, but the idea of being without him for so long was too much. He had come so far, but the fear of losing John, the fear of being alone again, was paralyzing. That night, after John had left, Samuel wandered through the house, the silence pressing in on him from every corner. The space that had once felt like a refuge now felt vast and empty. He missed John's presence, his warmth, his quiet strength. The world outside was still so unfamiliar. And without John beside him, Samuel felt like a ship adrift on an endless sea. Then, just as the weight of loneliness began to sink in, Samuel made a decision. He wasn't going to wait. He wasn't going to sit by and let fear control his future. If he truly wanted to be with John, he needed to take control of his own life, no matter how daunting it seemed. The next morning, Samuel packed a bag, gathered a few belongings he had, and made his way to John's college. It wasn't a decision made lightly, and as the miles stretched out before him, his heart raced with both excitement and fear. But he knew that this was the only way. He had to make a bold move if he wanted to build a future with the person he loved. When Samuel arrived at John's dorm, he didn't know what to expect, but he didn't care. This was the start of something new, something he was willing to fight for. As he stood in front of the dorm, taking a deep breath, he felt a sense of determination settle over him. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, ready to fight for their love. A bold decision, building a future together. It had been weeks since John left for college, and the loneliness that Samuel had initially felt began to evolve into something else. The absence of John had left a void in his life, but it also gave Samuel a deeper understanding of his feelings. He loved John truly and deeply, and the more time they spent apart, the clearer it became that he couldn't imagine a future without him. The nights without John were long. Samuel would often sit by the window, looking out at the stars, thinking about the life he had left behind and the life he was now trying to build. It wasn't easy, but with every passing day, he learned a little more about himself and the world around him. Yet, no matter how much he tried to settle into his new life, he still felt incomplete. The one piece that had been missing was John. The decision to go after him had been a long time coming. Samuel had spent countless hours thinking about it, weighing the pros and cons. He had come so far, leaving his family, his community, his entire life behind. But now it felt like a step he couldn't avoid any longer. He had to be with John, no matter the obstacles. He couldn't wait for another moment to slip away. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the sun was beginning to set, Samuel made up his mind. He packed a small bag with a few things he owned, clothes, some books, and the letter John had written to him when they first met. He took a deep breath, feeling both the weight and the thrill of his decision. He wasn't just running away. He was running towards something, towards someone who had made him feel truly alive. Samuel caught the first bus he could find, heading toward John's college, his heart racing with anticipation and fear. The journey was long, but it felt right. Every mile brought him closer to the future he had been dreaming of, and as the landscape outside the bus window changed, so did Samuel. He wasn't the same person who had first arrived in the modern world. He had grown, adapted, and learned, but most importantly, he had learned to love. When Samuel finally arrived at John's college, he felt both overwhelmed and determined. He had no idea how John would react to his sudden appearance, but that didn't matter. Samuel knew what he wanted. He had spent too long living in the shadows of fear and uncertainty. This was his chance to claim his future. As he stood in front of John's dorm, Samuel hesitated. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. His heart pounded in his chest as he waited, uncertain of what the next moment would bring. The door opened slowly, and there stood John, looking more surprised than Samuel had ever seen him. But then, his expression softened, and a smile spread across his face. "Samuel?" John whispered, disbelief in his voice. "What are you doing here?" Samuel stepped forward, his voice trembling but filled with certainty. "I couldn't stay away. I want to be with you, John. I'm not going to wait any longer. I've made my decision. I want this life, our life, no matter what it takes. John stood there for a moment, looking at Samuel with a mixture of astonishment and love. His eyes softened, and he stepped forward, wrapping Samuel in his arms. The world seemed to disappear as they held each other, and in that moment, Samuel knew everything was going to be okay. They were going to build their future together, step by step, building a future together. After that day, everything seemed to fall into place, though not without its challenges. Samuel was living at John's dorm, but it wasn't easy. The transition from living a simple, rural life to navigating college and city life had its hurdles. Samuel was still adapting, and the noise of the bustling campus, the constant pressure of coursework, and the distractions of modern life were all overwhelming at times. But Samuel wasn't alone. John was there, guiding him through each new experience, helping him make sense of things that once seemed impossible. They worked together, balancing classes, work, and their growing relationship. It wasn't always smooth, but every challenge only brought them closer. One evening, after a long day of studying, John and Samuel sat on the couch in their small dorm room, eating takeout and talking about everything and nothing. John asked, "How are you doing, really?" Samuel looked up from his plate, his eyes thoughtful. "I'm getting there," he said with a small smile. "Sometimes it feels like I'm not moving fast enough, but then I look at how far I've come. I never thought I'd be here, doing this." John reached over and took his hand. "You've come so far. I'm proud of you, and I'm here every step of the way." The reassurance in John's voice gave Samuel strength. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but as long as they were together, there was nothing they couldn't face. Every day, they learned something new about the world, about each other, and about themselves. Their love, though born in secret, had grown into something unbreakable. John's parents were also a huge support. They had welcomed Samuel into their home with open arms, helping him adjust to the world outside the Amish community. They showed him how to navigate things like technology, shopping for groceries, and even how to use a computer. Samuel had never touched a computer before, and the first time he used one, he stared at the screen in amazement. "So this is what it's like," he said, his voice filled with awe. "It's like a whole world at your fingertips." John's parents laughed, offering Samuel plenty of patience as he learned. They were kind and understanding, never pushing him too hard, always encouraging him to take his time. It felt like a home he had never known, warm, loving, and full of possibilities. As weeks passed, Samuel found himself becoming more confident. The once daunting world of modern life was no longer as terrifying. He learned how to navigate the city, how to use a phone, how to interact with people in ways that felt natural. There were still moments of doubt, moments when he longed for simplicity of his Amish roots, but they were fewer and farther between. His life with John and the future they were building had become his new reality. One night, as they sat together on the couch, John turned to Samuel with a smile. "You know, I think we're doing it. We're building the life we wanted." Samuel smiled back, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. "Yeah, we are, and it's everything I've dreamed of." The future wasn't certain, and there were still obstacles ahead. But with John by his side, Samuel knew that together they could overcome anything. They had already proven that. They were building something strong, something that would last, a love without boundaries, a new life. John and Samuel had come so far, from the quiet moments in the woods to the difficult transitions in the modern world. Their love had been tested in many ways. Yet, as they sat in the intimacy of John's dorm room one evening, something in the air shifted. The bond they had shared, built on trust, patience, and sacrifice, was about to reach its fullest expression. It had been years since they first met, and in that time, they had grown in ways neither could have anticipated. Samuel had learned to navigate the complexities of the modern world with John's support, and together, they created a life that was richer and fuller than either had imagined. Yet, they both felt the same deep yearning that had always been there. They longed for a deeper connection, one that was not just about overcoming obstacles, but about fully embracing the love they had fought so hard for. On that particular night, as the world outside was quiet and still, John and Samuel sat on the bed, close but not touching, both lost in thought. The years of uncertainty, of longing, had built up to this point. Neither of them knew how to describe what they were feeling, but it was unmistakable. Their connection was stronger than anything they had ever experienced. John turned to Samuel, his voice low and tender. "You know, I've been thinking," he began. Samuel looked up at him, his heart racing. "I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to keep holding back." Samuel's eyes softened. He knew exactly what John meant. "I don't want to hold back either," Samuel replied. "We've already come so far, and I can't imagine a future without you." Their words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had experienced together. In that moment, there were no boundaries between them. Not the walls of their past lives, not the fears of the world, and certainly not the expectations of others. There was only their love, a love that transcended time and space, a love that was as boundless as the world around them. Without another word, they came together in an embrace that felt like home. It wasn't just a physical closeness. It was a deep emotional connection that had been growing between them for years. It was an acknowledgement of everything they had fought for, everything they had endured, and everything they hoped to build. Their kiss was slow at first, tender, as if savoring the moment they had both longed for. It was more than just a kiss. It was a culmination of their journey, the proof that love could survive even the most difficult of circumstances. As they deepened the kiss, everything else faded into background. There was nothing but the two of them, their hearts beating in sync, their souls intertwined. Slowly, their hands began to explore, tracing the lines of skin they had dreamed about for so long. John's lips kissed down Samuel's chest, lingering for a moment, savoring the warmth of his skin. Samuel's breath caught in his throat as he felt John's touch, the gentle pressure of his lips sending waves of warmth through his body. Every kiss was an unspoken promise, a promise of devotion, of love, and of the future they would share together. As their kisses traveled lower, Samuel felt the tension of years of longing begin to dissipate. His body responded to John's touch, to the way he made him feel seen, cherished, and wanted. It was a quiet surrender, an acceptance of the depth of their bond. John's movements were slow, deliberate, as though he was savoring every moment, every sensation. He kissed across Samuel's abs, trailing lower until he felt the heat of their connection intensify. The air between them was thick with anticipation, with a shared understanding of what they had built together. It was a culmination of everything they had been through, everything they had endured, and everything they knew was still come. They were no longer just two people from different worlds. They were partners, bound together by love and the promise of a future that was theirs to shape. A new life. Years had passed since that pivotal moment. And looking back, it felt like a lifetime of love and growth had unfolded before them. Samuel and John had built a life together, one that was filled with joy, love, and a sense of purpose. The journey hadn't always been easy, but they had navigated each challenge together, side by side. One of the most important steps in their journey was the decision to create a family. They had talked about it for a while, and after much thought, they had decided to pursue parenthood through surrogate. It was a decision made lightly, but it was one they both felt deep in their hearts. They wanted to share their love, to raise children together, and to create a home that was full of warmth and acceptance. The day they found out they were going to be parents was one they would never forget. It was a bright, sunny morning when they received the news from their surrogate. As they sat together, holding hands, the joy they felt was overwhelming. Samuel looked at John with tears in his eyes. "We're going to be parents," he said softly, his voice trembling. John smiled, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Yes, we are. We're going to make a beautiful family." In the years that followed, they worked hard to create the life they had always dreamed of. The challenges of parenthood weren't easy, but they faced them with love and commitment. They were determined to give their children a home filled with everything they had longed for, a place where love and acceptance were the foundation. As they stood together before a judge, exchanging vows, they both knew that they had come a long way. They had defied the odds, faced their fears, and built a life that was true to who they were. Their love, once forbidden, had become the very thing that had shaped their future. They were creating something beautiful, something that would last for generations to come. Standing side by side, they promised to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives, just as they had done from the very beginning. Their love had no boundaries, no limits. It was pure, it was real, and it was theirs. And in that moment, as they looked at each other with hearts full of gratitude, Samuel knew that everything they'd been through, the pain, the struggles, the uncertainty had led them here. They had built a life together, a life that was full of love, and that was all they needed. As they walked out of the courtroom, hand in hand, they both smiled, knowing that their future was just beginning. Together, they had created a love without boundaries, and that love would carry them through everything that life would throw their way. A love that endures. As they stood together, hand in hand, looking out over the quiet landscape that stretched before them, Samuel couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace wash over him. The years they had shared, through their struggles, their triumphs, their growth, had brought them to this moment, and in that quiet stillness, everything felt complete. Their love had not been easy. It had been a journey full of challenges that tested them in ways they had never anticipated. But through it all, their bond had remained unbreakable. It had been forged in the fires of hardship and tempered by the beauty of perseverance. Samuel had come from a life of simplicity, of rules and expectations, and John had come from a world of limitless possibilities. Yet together, they had built a life that was truly their own, a life full of love, acceptance, and possibility. Looking back on everything they had endured, Samuel realized that their love wasn't just something that brought them together. It was the very thing that had shaped the future they now shared. It had taught them both about sacrifice, about the beauty of vulnerability, and about the strength that comes from facing the unknown hand in hand. As they stood on the porch of their home, the setting sun casting a warm, golden glow over the horizon, Samuel turned to John, his eyes full of emotion. "I can't believe how far we've come," he said, his voice soft but steady. "From the woods to here, from fear to freedom. Every step of the way, you've been by my side." John smiled, the lines of his face softening with the weight of years spent together. He cupped Samuel's face gently, his thumb brushing across his cheek. "You're my heart, Samuel. You always have been. And no matter what, I'll always be here, just like I promised." In that moment, there was no need for words. They had already said everything that needed to be said through their years of love, their shared experiences, and the quiet, unspoken understanding that had always passed between them. And then, as the world around them seemed to pause, Samuel leaned in. The kiss was slow and deliberate, a culmination of everything they had experienced together. It wasn't urgent or rushed. It was tender, a deep connection that felt like the world had stopped turning, leaving just the two of them in their own space, with nothing but love between them. John deepened the kiss, pulling Samuel closer, as if savoring the very essence of their connection. Samuel's arms wrapped around John's neck, the familiar warmth of his body filling him with a sense of belonging he had never known before. Their bodies pressed together, and it was as if time stood still. The kiss wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a vow renewed, and a quiet celebration of everything they had built together. As they pulled apart slightly, their foreheads resting together, they shared a quiet laugh, the kind of laugh that came from a place of deep contentment, from a love that had weathered storms and come out stronger on the other side. John's fingers traced the back of Samuel's neck, his touch lingering. "You're everything to me," John whispered. Us, this is what I always wanted." Samuel smiled, his heart full. "And I'm so grateful I found you. I've never known a love like this. A love that endures, that grows." They stood there for a long while, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sunset. In the peaceful silence, they both knew that no matter what the future held, they had already built something that would last forever. A love that had withstood every test. A love that had never been confined by boundaries, by expectations, or by time. It was a love that was truly theirs. As they moved inside hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held, Samuel and John knew that this was only the beginning. Together, they had created a life full of love and possibility, and their journey was far from over. But whatever came next, they would face it together, because their love, the one they fought for, had already endured, and it would continue to endure for all the days of their lives.
Thank you so much for watching this video here on Petals and Pride. We hope you enjoyed the journey as much as we did. If you did, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and ring that bell so you never miss out on more exciting stories and conversations. And hey, if you've got a story or experience you'd like to share, don't be shy. Reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. As always, stay fabulous, stay fierce, and remember, life's a ride, so keep blooming.